Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen Shapiro. I'm from the University of South Carolina. I'd like to thank the College Sport Research Institute for allowing us to present our research at the virtual 2021 CSRI conference. The title of our study is Secondary Ticket Market Pricing Determinants Among NCAA FBS Programs. My co-authors are Austin Schulte from Georgia Tech and Nels Pop from the University of North Carolina. So let's get started. So ticket sales are a significant revenue stream for college athletics. This bullet here shows the top 25 college football programs generated revenues of over $2.7 billion in 2018. And that's been steady growth over several years. Certainly 2020 and 2021 are going to be different because of the pandemic. But when things get back to normal, we've seen traditionally a steady increase in terms of revenue from tickets in college sport, and particularly college football. So ticket price is a big part of that. Obviously, optimizing ticket price is really valuable within college football programs. It's also a key component of the marketing mix. Ticket prices are the only aspect of the marketing mix that allows you to generate revenue where the others are cost. So it becomes a critical component. Ticket prices probably become even more important in college athletics because of the secondary ticket market. The proliferation of the resale market has allowed people to buy tickets on many platforms and look for a variety of different prices. And because of that, there's been a strong response in pro and college sport from the primary market for organizations to be able to compete with the resale market. So athletic departments price their tickets on a variety of factors. Moorhead did a study diving into all the different factors that college athletics or college football programs use to determine prices. We're going to talk about a lot of those. But the big thing here is that college football programs in general have been reluctant to use dynamic ticket pricing or real-time pricing. There are some organizations, some football programs that have done that. But by and large, they're still using a fixed price form. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on in the presentation. But that's a difference between college sport and pro sport in terms of pricing and maybe pricing strategies in terms of how they've evolved over the last 10, 15 years. One of the benefits of the resale market is that you are able to track ticket prices over time. So basically, you can look at changes in terms of supply and demand on a daily basis because tickets can be sold leading up to a game and prices fluctuate throughout that time period. So in terms of research on pricing in college sport, it's really limited, especially compared to what we've seen in professional sport. There's been some studies on managerial theory. The Moorhead study that I talked about talks more about philosophy of management of pricing. And then there's been a few studies by Reish looking at postseason ticket resale, particularly in college basketball with the NCAA basketball tournament and then bowl games in the college football playoff. The purpose of our study was to extend that research to look at ticket prices, particularly in college football within the regular season. It allows us a longer period of time to look at a bigger sample of games and see how that might change over the course of the season. We also focused on the resale market with the idea of being able to learn as much as we can about the relationship between fixed primary market prices and resale prices in the secondary market that fluctuate, and then see the factors that affect those prices within the secondary ticket market. So a quick overview of some of the research that we looked at. In general, with pricing theory, there's two relevant theories to what we're doing here in terms of pricing determinants. Price discrimination is one of them. That's a focus on different prices for the same product. We see price discrimination research across the board in terms of selling a variety of different products and services with the idea that there's other factors that can affect demand for the product. And so you could have the same type of product and priced differently based on a variety of those factors. The other big component that's related to pricing tickets in sport is revenue management. Revenue management is this idea that with a perishable item, ticket prices for that item can fluctuate and demand can fluctuate over time. And so trying to match price with demand becomes really valuable. We've seen it originate in hotels and airlines, both perishable items and the fact that in real time you'll see prices fluctuate depending on demand for a flight or for a hotel room. We've seen this transition in professional sport, primarily, some in college sport, but mostly in professional sport in terms of tickets. San Francisco Giants were the first team to implement it back in 2009, 2010 time period, to use a real-time pricing strategy to change prices as demand fluctuated. Again, this was a big response to the resale market because tickets are changing price in real time. And so organizations, teams, leagues had to respond to that. And so revenue management is one effort to do real-time pricing in an effort to respond to the secondary market. In terms of sports specifically, there's research out there that says price discrimination, looking at pricing tickets differently, even though you could say a given game is the same product or a given set of games within the season could be the same product. You're paying a ticket to watch an event. There's a lot of factors that make them different. The opponent, the time of day, whether it's a rivalry game, a lot of different factors. And so price discrimination is effective to price tickets differently based on a variety of these different factors, including probably the most common one, which is seat location. Another aspect is you can, because demand's fluctuating, you can fill additional seats. Filling additional seats has a low cost, so it doesn't cost that much money to sell more tickets and add more seats to a stadium where the seats already exist. Another big factor in terms of price discrimination, in addition to demand fluctuation and low cost on filling additional seats, is that perceived value varies per consumer. Each consumer has a different level of value for a ticket in a given seat location or for a given game, a given opponent. And so that really lends itself nicely to price discrimination. Other factors that come into play in terms of the research on pricing are price determinant studies. There's been a lot of studies that have looked at the factors that influence price, both in pro and college sport. Some of the common ones are team performance, population, income, day of the game, time of the game. These are things that have played a big role. A more recent, and I say recent within the last 10 years, focus in terms of pricing in sport is dynamic pricing in the response to the secondary market. There's been research that I did with my colleague Joris Dreyer that showed dynamic ticket pricing is effective in sport. It closes the gap between fixed season ticket prices of individual games and the secondary ticket market. There's traditionally been a big gap there. The secondary ticket market price could be a lot higher in high demand games, a lot lower in low demand games. And so dynamic ticket pricing does a good job of closing that gap. Another factor is resale price determinants, which are different than primary price determinants because we have a couple different factors. One is the face value of the ticket. The primary market ticket has been sold at a certain price, and so that kind of sets the stage in terms of how the price is going to change on the resale market. You also have ticket availability, which is a lot different than the primary market because tickets can be sold over and over again. So there's really no limit in the level of availability in the resale market. The number of transactions, and then a big factor that coincides with dynamic ticket pricing is this idea of days before the game. The fact that research shows that ticket prices tend to drop as a game draws near, all else being equal. And so these are some factors that are specific related to the resale market, which might be different than the primary market. In terms of college sports specifically, As I mentioned before, Reish did some research on postseason competition in men's basketball and football. They showed that there are factors that impact buyers' willingness to pay. The round of a tournament in college basketball, or the type of bowl game, seat location, the proximity to that the teams that are playing are to their universities, and then days before the game, as we mentioned before. The fact that typically as the game draws near, we'll see prices drop. And again, that ties in nicely with revenue management and this idea that it's a perishable product. So the fact is that it won't be worth anything once an event starts. So what were our research questions? We looked at two main things. We had data on the get-in price for college football tickets, and we wanted to see how resale get-in price for college football tickets. And when I say get-in price, I mean the lowest price on the resale market for the cheapest seat to get into the park, to the stadium. We wanted to see how that might change over time. And then we also wanted to see what variables predict that get-in price at various time periods leading up to game day. So our data, we had a set of data from 2019. It basically covered all Power 5 football programs. So it was a good set of data that could allow us to look at the major football programs across the spectrum of Division I FBS. We did a couple of things. We initially did kind of a trend analysis looking at primary and secondary prices at given points. And then to look at the pricing determinants in college sport, we used regression models. Our dependent variables for those regression models were the get-in price that we talked about. We used StubHub, and we looked at get-in prices for all the different games throughout the 2019 season in which a Power 5 football program was involved. And then our four intervals, or our four dependent variables for the four different regressions, were when the initial AP poll was released, so basically the preseason, what the price was, 2 weeks prior to game day, a week prior, or Monday of game week. Also, some of these games were on Thursday, Fridays, and Saturdays, and then the day before the game. And that gave us kind of an idea of how these not only what the factors are, but how they might change as a game draws near. Our independent variables, we had a bunch of them. We use the literature on price determinants in pro sport to kind of guide this, and Reish's studies on postseason college sport. And we broke them up into four different categories. We had time or environmental variables. So those were things like day, week of the season, kickoff time, the temperature, whether there was a chance of rain, those types of things. Then we looked at game-related variables. So we took the betting line to get an idea of uncertainty of outcome or competitiveness between the games, between the teams, conference affiliation of each team, type of television coverage, whether it was a game that was televised, whether it was on cable, national, or regional, or nationally televised. We looked at common performance variables, so current and home visiting team win percentages, previous season home winning and away team winning percentages, strength of home and away team performance, recruiting class was another thing. We used a lot of factors that were common in the professional price determinant literature, but also took a look at things that might be relevant to college sport. And then finally, market variables. So the single game ticket price that was on the athletic department website, what the capacity of the venue was, enrollment at the school, all factors that might play a role in resale price. So in terms of our results, we had 434 games to look at. 15 games were removed. Single ticket prices weren't available by the athletics department if they involved certain teams. So we took those teams out. And then we had 4 get-in price observations per game, because remember, it was before the season, 2 weeks out, 1 week out, and the day of the game. So we ended up with 1,676 total observations. The average athletic department ticket price was $50.42. The range was anywhere from $10 to $175. And then you can see the average resale prices at each point in time, from $38.45 at preseason to $31.99 the day before the game. And a quick note here before we jump into the research questions was you can just see the trend, which is similar to the literature, the fact that the price generally drops as the game draws near. These are some comparisons for research question 1, looking at the average get-in price and comparing that to that fixed ticket price that we collected for every team from the primary market. As you can see, secondary market prices were lower in general. Now, this was, of course, an average across all the different games that we looked at. Some big games were certainly going to have prices in the resale market above the primary market because they were a big game. But by and large, if you look at an entire season of all Power 5 teams, on average, the price is going to be lower. Another interesting thing is we saw that percentage lower increase as the game draws near, because of course the fixed primary market price isn't changing, but on the resale market it's dropping. So that $38.45 that you're seeing here in preseason was 31% below the primary market price, average price. But then when we look at the day before the game, that $31.99 price was 57%. So again, consistent with some of the previous literature, looking at the fact that prices tend to drop on the resale market as the game draws near. In terms of the research question 2, and looking at the factors that affect these resale prices, the determinants of the resale prices, and looking at them at each time period. This was our significant variables for the AP poll. So this was the preseason look at these ticket prices. You can see model explained a significant portion of variance and get-in price on StubHub. The key significant variables here, and it'll be interesting to kind of look at how these change over time, over the different time periods, but ticket price, and then some factors really focused on the away team. So away recruiting, away win percentage from the previous year, away bowl game. We also saw some element of month of the game play a role. In this case, it was that last indicator of month. So basically the last month of the season that played a role here. And if you think about that's the biggest gap too, away from time, because this model was for before the season. When we look at 2 weeks out, we see a few more variables in this model, which was also significant, play a role. The R squared dropped a little bit, not significantly though. We see some of the same factors like ticket price, month, away rank that are playing a role here. And then we see some other things that start to come into play. The home team and whether they had been in a bowl game, whether it's nationally televised or not, was significant. And then distance starts to play a role here in terms of the lesser distance, the higher the price would be. So distance of the away team from the stadium. When we look at 1 week out, we have somewhat similar variables. Again, significant, slightly lower R squared, but not anything overly meaningful. Ticket price, again, seems to be straightforward throughout all these models. Distance is still there, having a negative relationship. We see some other things that we've seen already in the previous models, national television, rank. Some of these other things come into play, like weather and precipitation. We'll talk a little bit about that in the discussion, but it's interesting how now we're getting closer. Maybe these weather-related factors are playing a role a little bit more. And then interestingly enough, we saw betting line come into play and enrollment. These are factors that didn't seem to have as much of a role as we were further out before the season and 2 weeks out of the game. But once we're getting now a week out of the game, they seem to be playing a more um, substantial role in terms of resale ticket price. Our final model is a day out, a little bit smaller model in terms of the number of significant variables that made it. A much smaller R squared here. We'll talk about that trend a little bit in this discussion, but basically there's a pretty consistent drop in terms of the variance explained in the resale price per model. As the game draws near, the model is explaining less variance. Some of the variables, again, you see here are similar with ticket price, distance, some away factors, month, capacity, precipitation were in there before. Now we see current home and away win percentage come into play. So I think, again, maybe a factor is being played here. Now we're right before the game. How the team is doing at that given time maybe becomes more important than it was weeks out, or certainly several weeks to months out for the preseason games. But the one thing is, I think, in demonstrating this is kind of showing you these models fluctuated. There wasn't huge changes from model to model, but there definitely were variables that seem to play different roles at different time periods, which kind of shows you that the environment is different in terms of resale and what impacts resale at a given point in time before a football game. So what are some of our key findings? First, that get-in price, that resale price, the lowest price you could buy on StubHub diminishes as the game day approaches. Again, as I mentioned previously, this is consistent with literature, so it wasn't surprising to see that. But what's really interesting is more and more college football teams are not using real-time pricing. Some have tried it and then since given it up. Many have not tried it at all for various reasons. But when you have a fixed price and the price is changing as a game draws near, and particularly going down, if you're someone purchasing a ticket and you're looking at StubHub and then you're looking at the website for a team, you might see a substantial difference in terms of price, and you're more likely to buy in the resale market. So I think that's an important factor. Also, and going along with that, is the get-in price on the resale market was always lower than the primary ticket. Again, this really is heavily determinant of the game. I mean, when you have a major game going on, a rivalry game, Alabama, Auburn, and the Iron Bowl, or a game that's going to affect maybe conference standings, or who's going to win the conference, or who's going to be in the top four for the college football playoff. Those are high demand events, and certainly the resale market price is going to skyrocket in some cases. But on average, when you look at all the different college football games in a given season, the get-in price is on average lower than the primary market price. And so that's important information for teams to understand. Are they pricing optimally? Now knowing that informed consumers have different options in terms of where to buy tickets. Another thing, I mentioned this briefly when we were going over the models, is the models explain less variance as the game day approaches. So this is a little bit different than maybe what we thought. You think maybe there'd be more certainty in terms of understanding what factors affect ticket prices as the game draws near. But we saw the opposite, the fact that maybe uncertainty increases in terms of not knowing what factors are going to affect the prices for tickets as the game draws near. So we thought that was an interesting finding to highlight. The distance between opponents was initially not significant, but became significant as the game approached. Maybe people haven't made up their mind as much in terms of the, if we're looking at this from an individual person perspective, which we're not, but in terms of implications, maybe the distance just becomes more important when people are ready to make that decision, or maybe distance is a factor. If I'm buying a ticket, before the season starts, I may not care. But if I'm on the fence, maybe that distance between is a factor, and maybe the fact that the game's more important makes me make that decision now that the game's closer. And then weather-related variables were not really quite as expected. Temperature was not significantly related. Precipitation had a negative relationship a week out, but positive prior to. There could be certainly things like slight multicollinearity playing a role here, or just the nature of the data. But it is interesting to see that those weren't consistent. Of course, there's a lot of different factors that come into play in terms of the type of weather that's in different places, parts of the country. The fact that some of these games are held in indoor stadiums, those all play a role here. But it was interesting to look at some of the inconsistencies in terms of weather, both temperature and precipitation. So some other things that come into play. Buyers may become conditioned to wait as long as possible. This is one of the issues that comes up in terms of the resale market. If you're seeing clear evidence that ticket prices are dropping and people become informed of that, they may wait. There's certainly a lot of challenges associated with that. If you're a athletic department, it's in your best interest to sell as many tickets as early as possible to have an idea of what type of revenue to expect. Early individual tickets, season tickets, those types of things. Yet on the resale market, we see waiting might have its benefits for a lot of different teams and a lot of different games. So what are some of the things athletic departments can do? Well, they may want to add value to buying early. So are there incentives for buying early? Would you be able to get added value to purchasing the ticket? Maybe access to other events that are outside of the game itself, maybe the ability to get in the stadium early, those types of things. Another thing is athletic departments could stagger or delay the release of tickets instead of releasing them all at one point in time in the beginning of the season, and then they kind of flood the resale market, holding on to tickets so that you do have a primary market supply of tickets at a month before the game, at possibly 2 weeks before the game. There may be some arguments of the risk involved in doing that, because if you have demand for tickets at a certain period of time, you might as well sell them. But it also lets you deal with this issue, because perhaps you could, if you're not using dynamic pricing, you could still change the price of those tickets that you haven't sold at a given point in time. Another thing is athletic departments may want to embrace dynamic ticket pricing. And the fact is there's a lot of benefits to be able to allow the price to fluctuate based on demand and allow that to happen up until game day. We've seen it used effectively in professional sport. Football certainly is a little bit different than sports like baseball, basketball. The more inventory you have, the more likely revenue management and dynamic pricing is going to work for you. So college football, you might only have 6 or 7 home games to work with, but at the same time, having the ability to change that price can be, of value rather than being set on a fixed price before the season starts. Traditional demand variables explain less variance closer to game day. So, we want to look at what additional factors like number of tickets available or consumers' intrinsic motivations, maybe diving deeper into studying the consumer themselves to explain why that get-in price is lower. And then finally, factors such as distance between opponents and weather may be more of a reflection of the resale market sellers than market buyers. Remember, you have a multitude of sellers. Some people are ticket brokers doing it for business. Some people are just season ticket holders, can't make a game. Some people are trying to take advantage of an individual game or two to generate a little bit more money because they see maybe an arbitrage opportunity. All these different factors lead to understanding the seller a little bit more, or sellers, which is a lot greater number of people with different, goals and objectives than an organization, an athletic department. And so I think some of these things might be playing a role that's a little bit different on a resale market. Not to mention the fact that some of these resale sellers are working with teams. There's partnerships with brokers and other resale market entities where they're working with teams, and they'll buy up tickets and then sell them. So strategically, there that it might be important to understand seller motives. So that wraps up our study. We're hoping to continue to build this out and look at it in more depth. This was just one season, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to understand how the college athletic environment is a little bit different than professional sports, and in particular football, how prices can fluctuate a lot on a lot of these factors. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to extend the literature. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the conference.